Welcome to the Safety Pro Podcast, where we help you manage workplace safety one episode at a time. And now, your very own Safety Pro, Blaine J. Hoffman.
That's right, this is the Safety Pro Podcast. I am Blaine Hoffman. Just think of me as your personal safety consultant. This is the first in a series of introductory episodes about safety and health management. Now, I wanted to release a series that breaks down important aspects of safety and health before I get into specific things you need to do in order to manage safety in your business. This is episode 1, the Introduction to Safety Manuals. Before I get into safety manuals, let's just cover some background on the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Now, more than 90 million Americans spend their days on the job. However, it wasn't until 1970 that we had any kind of uniform and comprehensive provisions to protect workers against safety and health hazards. So, in 1970, Congress considered such statistics as in like 14,000 worker deaths each year, nearly 2.5 million workers being disabled every year, and there were more than 10 times as many personal days lost from job-related injuries and illnesses than there were days lost from, let's say, worker strikes at that time. And of course, the estimated new cases of occupational diseases totaled, somewhere in excess of 300,000 a year. Now, in terms of lost production and wages, medical expenses, disability compensation, and just the burden on the nation's commerce was astronomical. It was staggering. Of course, human cost was beyond calculation, so the Occupational Safety and Health Act, or OSHA Act, of 1970 was passed by a bipartisan Congress, and in their words, to assure so far as possible every working man and woman in the nation safe and healthful working conditions, and to preserve our human resources. So what the act set up was to create an administration under the Department of Labor so that they could encourage employers and employees to reduce workplace hazards, to implement new or improve existing safety and health programs. It also provided for research in occupational safety and health to develop new ways of dealing with occupational safety and health problems. It also established separate but dependent responsibilities and rights for employers and employees for the achievement of better safety and health conditions. It also maintains a reporting and record-keeping system to monitor job-related injuries and illnesses. They also establish training programs to increase the number and the competence of occupational safety and health personnel. OSHA also develops mandatory job safety and health standards, and of course, they're charged with the enforcement of those standards, as we all know. They also provide for the development, analysis, evaluation, and approval of any state occupational safety and health programs. So about half the states in the country have set up and maintained their own occupational safety and health program. It's a state-run plan. It isn't federal OSHA that actually comes out and enforces standards in the workplace. It would be somebody from the state. Now, while OSHA does continuously review and redefine specific standards and practices, its basic purpose remains constant. They strive to implement its congressional mandate fully and firmly, and with fairness to all concerned. Now, in all of its procedures, from standards development through implementation and enforcement, OSHA guarantees employers and employees the right to be fully informed, to participate actively, and to appeal any of its action. So let's go ahead and talk about who is covered by the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. Now, in general, coverage of the Act extends to all employers and their employees in the 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and all other territories under federal government jurisdiction. Coverage is provided either directly by federal OSHA or, as I'd already mentioned, through an OSHA-approved state program. Now, as defined by the Act, an employer is any person engaged in a business affecting commerce who has employees. But this does not include the United States or any state or political subdivision of a state. Some states have chosen by law to follow federal OSHA standards for their state workers. Other states have their own state public employee risk reduction program or safety program. It gets a little dicey here, but basically, if you're a private employer and you have an employee, even one employee, you're covered by the Act. There are some folks that are exempt, okay? This is important as well. I know a lot of these people. Any self-employed person, you're exempt from the Act. Farms at which only immediate members of the farm employer's family are employed, exempt. And workplaces that are already protected by other federal agencies under other federal statutes are exempt. A good example of this one would be a mine or a mining operation. The Mine Safety and Health Administration and its standards would be enforced. However, there's even a caveat to that. Even when that other federal agency, like MSHA, is authorized to regulate safety and health working conditions, if it does not do so in specific areas, then OSHA standards would apply. The Act encourages states to develop and operate, under OSHA guidance, their own safety and health plans. And this is true. They're encouraged to do so. If a state plan is approved by federal OSHA, then OSHA will fund up to 50% of the program's operating costs. However, the state plans are required to provide standards and enforcement programs, as well as any kind of voluntary compliance activities, like a VPP type program, which I'll talk about in a future episode. But their standards have to be at least as effective as the federal program. Okay, so that's just a real quick rundown. And I mean, I just scratched the surface on the introduction to OSHA, okay? But what this does is it sets up the foundation upon which we will build everything else going forward, okay? So today's episode, safety manuals. For this discussion, we need to define some terms. The overall safety and health management system, or safety program, refers to everything you're doing in the company to manage safety. All right, this includes any training you're doing, any audits you're conducting, any written programs that you have, any surveys you're doing, industrial hygiene monitoring, personal protective equipment, everything. We're going to focus primarily for this episode on the written manuals part of that system. Some refer to these written documents as safety plans. But I'm going to tell you, in my experience as a safety consultant, whenever I ask to see a client's written safety plan, they always say, hey, you mean our safety manual? So, for this episode, I will stick to the term manuals when referring to the written portion of the safety and health management system or your safety program. Most companies have specific things in mind when looking at safety and its benefits. Of course, things like reducing costs of downtime, workers' compensation premiums, things like that. Because the underlying cause of accidents is directly related to the safety program or lack of specific safety program elements or systems, having an effective safety and health management system and processes in place is critical. Okay? Yet many companies do not have these systems or processes or have comprehensive manuals describing each of their safety processes. So that's what we're going to focus on, written safety manuals. Now, these manuals, just because you have a manual on a shelf, that's only an indication of top management support for safety and health. In order to ensure everyone understands their role, what is expected of them, what to expect regarding safety, the company needs to develop a comprehensive safety program with written safety manuals for each topic covered. Having a formal written program helps you to define and direct the safety effort. It ensures that the programs cover all major safety issues on a topic-by-topic basis, organizing the safety information in an accessible and logical order. That's what your written manuals are going to do. So why do we need program? Now, we have safety processes in place, but why do they need to be documented? Why should we write them down? Well, OSHA requires written documentation in several areas of workplace safety standards. For example, anytime an employer requires an employee to wear any personal protective equipment, even just putting on safety glasses or goggles or wearing special gloves for certain chemicals, things like that. The employer must have a documented hazard assessment on file that explains why that particular form of PPE is needed. Okay, so we're gonna kind of start with that basis that we have a fundamental requirement in place that we document in writing how we manage safety on a topic by topic basis. Okay, topic by topic being fall protection, personal protective equipment, confined spaces, hazard communication, walking working surfaces, housekeeping. Now, aside from the fact that we need to have written systems in place that address a variety of safety and health compliance issues, another purpose of any written program is to set standard procedures for the daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, and annual activities associated with a given safety topic. Developing a written safety program, which includes manuals and procedures, can take a considerable amount of time and money, actually, to be honest with you, whether you do it yourself or hire somebody to do it. But in return, it provides a company and its employees with communication of known safety hazards associated with the tasks, equipment, processes, facilities that they're going to be involved with. It also sets up well-established goals and objectives regarding safety and health. You're also going to find in most of these programs, written programs, there is sort of this overlaying mission statement or commitment to safety, okay, or setting a tone for safety in an organization. Written standards and expectations of management and employees are usually going to be in these written manuals as well. You're also going to find that you establish clear boundaries and disciplinary actions for failure to follow safety guidelines. You're also going to have defined safety roles and responsibilities for managers, supervisors, and employees. That's going to be critical, okay? You're also going to have the establishment of a safety budget in a lot of these manuals. We're going to cover a lot of these, but the purpose of written safety and health manuals, they're going to vary from one company to another depending upon the industry you're in, the size, the hazards present. So you need to take the time to address your company's unique situations through the use of these written manuals. You're going to have access to all of these notes on the show notes. If you go to our website, consulthoffman.com, and go to podcast, on the podcast page, you'll see this episode with these notes. Now, if you're listening on iTunes, on an iOS device, there's going to be an iOS app that you can download and subscribe to. You're going to get actually more information on these. You're going to have handouts, templates to fill out to start you on your way to, creating your manuals. You're going to have checklists, things like that you're only going to get through the app. Okay, but going forward, take good notes. Send me some emails with questions. Go to our website and look at the show notes. Okay, you're going to be able to follow along pretty well on this. So, first thing we need to start with is how you write your manual. We're going to talk about some fundamentals here. You've got to write them so that others can read them, okay? So when writing a safety manual or any document of any kind, I'm going to list some pointers here that can help make your words understandable to everybody involved. 1, keep your sentences short and concise and to the point, but make sure they're not choppy. 2, use the term you to convey ownership by the employees reading the manual. If you prefer to keep it a little more technical or formal, if you have a technical writer kind of go through this stuff, then you could also create an introduction that addresses the reader personally and create that tone up front, implying that everything you read after that is up to the employee's responsibility to act upon and inform their supervisor when they don't understand something along those lines, okay? Number 3, use active verbs in parts of the written manuals. Use active verbs. This keeps it lively, but it makes complying with the manual observable. meaning you can see the actions taking place at work. I'm going to have more about how to write parts of the manual later on, but just remember that. Use active verbs. Number 4, avoid words or terms like technical jargon that most folks won't understand. If you have to use these terms, be sure to define it first, or at least the first time it's used. And then it's a good idea to keep it in a glossary of terms at the beginning or end of the manual. So anytime an employee is thumbing through a manual, they hit upon a term that they don't quite understand, they can at least go back and reference that. Number 5, say what you mean in plain language. It's kind of another take on the previous point, but hints, innuendos, fuzzy words that may be confusing, they'll be insufficient to communicate the regulatory required information, or employees would just ignore them. And let me give you an example. Never use the words should or should not if you do or do not want employees to do something. Just simply say shall or shall not. If you imply, well, it's a good idea to wear your safety glasses when using the right angle grinder, people are going to see that as a suggestion and not that it's a requirement. So make sure you say what you mean in plain language. Number 6, avoid legalese. It may be easy to fall into this when writing regulatory required topics, but try to avoid it. Using plain language and addressing people directly, if possible, can help you avoid the problem of folks not understanding what you're talking about. Instead of saying that for liability reasons and risk management purposes, the general public is prohibited from entering the back of the building or the production area, just state that for the safety of non-personnel, nobody can go into the back or the production area, and then just write your policy. Number 7, revise your first draft at least once and edit it several times if possible. You'll find things that you need to add that were left out by accident, or you will find ways of editing yourself for clarity. And always review it with a select group of employees. And make sure they're from a cross-section of the company. They're going to be able to provide feedback, and they'll usually find gaps in the manuals, the written manuals that the writer would often miss, okay? And number 8, ensure that the written manual is complete. Always check with regulations to be sure you addressed at least the minimum required areas of the topic. We're going to discuss more specific areas of the standards in future episodes, topic by topic, okay? So I just covered, in a nutshell, how you can write the manuals or your documents so that it can be understood. Remember, 1, keep sentences short and concise. 2, establish ownership. Use the term you when writing your manual. Number 3, use action verbs in parts of the manual. 4, avoid techno jargon. 5, say what you mean in plain language. 6, avoid legalese. 7, revise your first draft and edit. And number 8, ensure that it is complete and covers all the hazards of your facility. So, who reads the manual, the safety manual? The most important rule of thumb to use when writing any type of document is to know your audience. So all those 8 points I just gave you are all based on you understanding who your audience is. Who are you writing this for? Okay? So when writing your safety manuals, direct the substance and content of your message to the people who will need to work with it or use these manuals. The more closely related to actual conditions your employees will encounter on the job, the more useful the plan will be. So use specific terms about equipment that they're going to be using in the facility or in your business. Use business-specific or company-specific language that they're used to, okay? I can usually spot a canned written safety program that somebody bought off the internet and just kind of typed in their company name when it's very vanilla, very generic. It doesn't even reference a print press or a mixer or an industrial oven or anything like that, okay? So make sure that you tailor it to your audience. Related to knowing your audience is, I can't reiterate this enough, to use that terminology and a writing style that's accessible to them. Consider their education level, and their familiarity with this terminology, okay, in your industry. But make it specific to them. Okay, so we're going to cover some tips for making your safety manuals work. Now, the successful implementation of your written safety manuals and procedures depends on some key factors. One, you have to be able to keep a long-term perspective. Even with the implementation of written safety manuals, improvements aren't going to happen overnight just because you wrote it and you handed it to people. The planning and organizing of the activities that will emit improvements, they take time and commitment from all levels of the company. But keep in mind that the longer your organization takes to implement and conform to its manuals and procedures, the longer it will continue to pay for its deviations. So the longer you'll have incidents, injuries, or the longer period of time you'll have that you're exposed to compliance risk, okay, from not having written procedures or manuals. And unless the implementation remains a priority, your organization risks losing the commitment of its employees. So you have this big meeting, you kick off to everybody, hey, we're going to take safety serious. We're going to come up with some safety programs, policies, procedures. We're going to involve you. And then, boom, you drag your feet. Nothing gets done. Employees are going to see that as, wow, this is just another flavor of the month, something else they're going to start and not finish. So have a plan. Keep long-term perspective. Next, work from the top down. Get top management commitment first. If your company's safety implementation plan is dependent on just one person's leadership, usually the safety manager or one of the managers, then that plan's usually going to die, okay? It's going to wither. And the manuals will ultimately be ineffective. So the manuals and procedures need to be accepted company-wide. And piecemeal implementation virtually guarantees failure, okay? Just doing it a little at a time here and there. Therefore, obvious, visible examples of management commitment, top management commitment, toward developing these written plans has to be established by top management of the company up front. Now, I'm going to have an episode dedicated to management commitment coming soon, so make sure you be on the lookout for that one, okay? Next, encourage employee involvement. Manuals and procedures will help define job roles and expectations. The individuals in an organization that best understand their roles, know what is expected, and know how to improve it, they're the ones that are performing them. Manuals and procedures empower employees to make decisions that positively affect the bottom line results of the company. Once an issue or activity of the company has been determined to need a policy, employee input should be solicited throughout the development and implementation process. Get folks involved. This is going to create buy-in and support. They were a part of creating it. They're more likely to accept it. And this is another topic where I will dedicate an entire episode to talking about meaningful employee involvement with the safety program. Next, continuously provide training. Training is vital in order to reach a common understanding of the goals and objectives of your manuals and the means to attain them. Management has to also realize that training doesn't stop. I mean, it can never be considered finished just because you did an employee orientation. This continuous training process is accomplished by constantly reinforcing the actions or behaviors desired by the manuals and the procedures and through open and honest communication. This is yet another topic where I will dedicate an entire episode to talking about safety and health training and its importance and establishing a training program within your company. It's going to be an entire episode, okay? So also be on the lookout for that one. The next tip to ensure written program success: develop a measurement and reporting system. Measurements that are based on facts, like statistical data, have to be established to assess the effectiveness of your manuals and procedures. Okay, measurements might include like measuring deviations from a procedure, number of or percent of preventative maintenance that is overdue on machines, the number of findings that you're writing down during your audit and in which departments or which areas, things like that. In addition, the reporting of information must be done regularly. Okay, set up this timeline of when things have to be completed. It's got to be timely, accurate, and shared. All employees require information so that problems or deviations from policies and procedures can quickly be defined, analyzed, and eliminated. Don't hide information just because it may not make the company look good. When there are problems, you need to discuss them openly and honestly so that everybody can kind of pitch in and try to tackle them together. Next, provide effective communication. The implementation of written manuals and procedures may have a significant impact on the activities of your organization. So they will establish definite guidelines and will call for a much tighter integration among all departments and individuals. Okay, so communication is going to be critical. You can't just write it and throw it out there and expect people to read it. You have to make sure you communicate everything in different ways, in writing, in meetings, and even with some online interactive training if that's something that's available to you. But you can't just do one thing and call it done. You have to do it in several ways, okay, continuously. Several factors go into effective communication, such as all written manuals must have a clear objective statement and can be understood by all. Definite training and review of how the manuals will be created and introduced. An opportunity for all employees to become involved in the information gathering process and participation in policy development. Everything I've stated already. It's worth repeating because all of that are forms of communication. When you get people involved and pull a task force together from a good cross-section of the organization and say, hey, here's what we're going to tackle and here's why, they carry that message back out onto the production floor or back out into the company with them. Okay, they've got that buy-in. They can actually speak to it, and that can be a force multiplier for management when communicating. Also, watch out for stumbling blocks along the way. Several months after policy implementation, the message that, hey, we will run our organization according to our manuals and procedures, it's no longer a new thing and may have lost some of its juice, some excitement. So as measurements improve, you will begin to see a true picture of company performance or behavior. The realization that overall things are not going as well as they should might cause some disappointment and anxiety, as I said earlier. The worst thing you can do is start to lock all that down and hide things. And a lot of folks that I talk to, they don't do it on purpose. It's just a natural reaction because they don't want to be embarrassed. It's also a sign that one individual is spearheading the effort. And when things start to come in, reports and from audits, and they start to look bad, seemingly look bad, that individual sees it as, wow, it's going to make me look like I'm not doing my job. That's why you need to nip that in the bud early on by getting top management support for the safety program. And that way you have an open, honest discussion about things that are going on. You don't cause that disappointment and anxiety about the safety program just because data coming back shows you have some gaps, okay? Don't expect quick and dramatic results within days of implementing and rolling out your safety manual, okay, your written manual. They are designed to give direction and decision-making guidance. And your employees will not change their behavior overnight simply because a policy is handed to them. Manuals and procedures are for long-term and continual improvement. The policy objectives are rarely achieved in the first several months, or even in the first year in many organizations. Now, I will talk about specific manuals like the HAZCOM manual and the PPE and the fall protection, things like that, in future episodes. We will tackle topic by topic going through the safety manual, okay? All of which will have handouts, checklists, and notes available, as I said. For the exclusive downloads, you've got to go to the Safety Pro Podcast app. It's going to be on Windows, including Windows Phone, my personal favorite. It's going to be on iOS devices and Android devices. So be on the lookout for that. As always, you can subscribe to the podcast via iTunes or the Stitcher app for Android. And you can always listen online at consulthoffman.com. This podcast is safe for work, so tell your coworkers to tune in as well. Tell your boss you're getting some professional development here. You're learning how to improve your safety program. This was just a brief introduction to safety manuals, okay? I just wanted to kind of get this out of the way to set up the next few episodes going forward. So don't forget, those tips I laid out for you for making your safety manuals work. Keep long-term perspective. Work from the top down. Get that management commitment. Encourage employee involvement. Continuously provide training. Develop measurement and reporting system. Provide effective communication. And then watch out for those stumbling blocks. Don't be afraid of data that comes in that shows you have gaps. That's exciting. That means you're now able to see something that you may not have been seeing before, and it gives you an opportunity to close that gap before it causes a compliance problem for you.
Thanks for listening to the Safety Pro Podcast. Be sure to visit www.consulthoffman.com for articles and information about safety services. To have Blaine read your question on the show, email him at customerservice@consulthoffman.com. Be sure to have 2 F's and 2 N's on Hoffman. Until next time, be safe.